Hey everybody. So this is Monday, February the 14th, so happy Valentine's Day. I can't see because there's a lot of glare. Hopefully you'll be able to see me. I guess that's the more important thing. But I wanted to go quickly through a few items that we covered in class today for the folks who weren't there, because I really want everybody to kind of have it in mind when we come back into the classroom on Wednesday. So I don't always try to do video recaps, but I thought today I would give it a shot. Ow, I really can't. The glare really is very bad. So first things first, some of you have already found this thread, even if you weren't in class today, and added to it. Please feel free to continue doing that. But we had a thread in class where I think it was a discussion thread in Canvas, and I think the title was "How do I explain ... little question mark," and I posed the prompt. Pretend that an alien from outer space has just teleported in and you're going to try and explain either the Super Bowl or Valentine's Day. I was, trying to pick two things that would be top of mind, kind of. So try and explain the concept of one of those. And I said, make it more than just a list of things that people do on that occasion. Give us some sort of sense of the cultural significance or whatever. I thought people did really well on those, actually. You never know how that kind of thing is going to go. You tweak the prompts every time and hope for the best. I thought people did really well. If you missed today's class, that discussion thread assignment piggybacked on something that we also went over in class today, and that's kind of where I want to pick up in this video. So the thing that I had kind of been putting on the board and guiding people through was a discussion of different strategies that we can use to explain a concept in an essay. And we talked a little bit about how the strategies that we choose, and it's not always just one strategy, right? You can mix and match. But the strategies that we choose are always going to depend on a combination of two main factors. So one of those factors is the stuff you have to explain, right? Like the actual material and information. And the other one is the folks you got to explain it to, right? The audience for that explanation. And you can't really choose those two independently, like who your audience is and what these people likely already know and would understand is going to determine which pieces of available information you need to convey, and the total realm of information that could be relevant is going to determine what is even there to be conveyed, right? So these are kind of in interaction, right? You can't pick from something that isn't related to your concept because this is random. You only need to explain certain aspects of it for a given audience. I think an example that I used, I didn't use it in the first class, I used it in my 10 o'clock class. Some of you will have heard this before. But an example that I explained was if I am giving a presentation to other scholars in my general subject area, I probably won't start out by explaining to them what intertextuality is. They'll already know that, right? So I just kind of leap in, assuming they know that, and I'm applying the term, and I just kind of jump in and I go to the next complicated thing that is also a concept that needs explaining, but in this case, something more detailed in my research project or whatever. They don't already know that concept, right? On the other hand, intertextuality may be a totally new word to many of you. If you're not working in literature and linguistics, you probably don't use this word a lot. So for a general audience, I would need to start by explaining that idea and lead into whatever more complicated thing I'm there to talk about. So this is kind of, it's an interesting problem in writing, and I run into this in my professional life all the time, because you will never communicate effectively if you aren't sure to whom you're communicating, or if you don't at least have some kind of idea, where these folks are coming from, right? It'll be gobbledygook. So, one thing that you can do, one technique that you can deploy once you have an understanding of who your audience is that in combination sometimes with these other strategies we've talked about, like chronological and thematic and key figures and thinkers, a strategy that you can kind of put into dialogue with these and kind of help to streamline your project is to start with the familiar to your audience, right? So start with things that are already familiar to them and explain the new thing that you're here to, you're here to explain a new concept. Start with what they already know and explain the new thing in terms of the familiar stuff. So that might be something like, when I was trying to explain rhetorical analyses, some of you had already done a rhetorical analysis before, right? Like, there were people in the class who had already written one, but there were also several people who had not written a rhetorical analysis before, and to whom this was a totally new skill. And so, trying to kind of gauge the audience, I didn't start from zero because everybody there had done some reading. Like, you can indeed all read, but not everybody had done this kind of writing based on reading. And so I started by talking about other kinds of writing about pieces of writing that you might have encountered before. So I talked a little bit about book reports and about literary analyses and reading reflections, and tried to give you a sense of where a rhetorical analysis fit by comparison to these other things that might be a little bit more familiar to you. And it's not the case that everybody had familiarity with each of those, but most people, based on the comments that I got, so I hope I'm right about this, most people had encountered one or two of those before. And so thinking about a rhetorical analysis in terms of those other formats, and also in terms of, like, the assignment guidelines and so on, the idea was that it would give you multiple ways of understanding this type of writing, right? Like, it would give you several chances to get it, right? Like, okay, you can understand it by how it's similar to and different from these other genres. You can understand it in terms of these are the basic components it has to have. You can understand it in all these kinds of ways. So that's almost it for this video. I want you to be thinking about how we can explain unfamiliar concepts to audiences in terms of concepts that are familiar to them, and how we determine what's going to be familiar to our audiences, right? Because knowing that you can explain the strange in terms of the familiar is of no use unless you know what's familiar to your audience. So I want you to be thinking about audiences and their knowledge in that kind of way. And the other thing that I wanted to say that's kind of like not on this topic, but I want to put it out there. I got a couple of questions over the last few days about missing assignments from the days when I would put up a post and say, okay, share your notes from class, or from today's class, or from the last couple of class periods, or whatever, those discussion threads. 2 items. First of all, if you are missing, like if you just didn't do that assignment, please do understand that if you skipped the assignment because you missed class and therefore had no notes, every time I post one of these, I am also posting an alternate assignment for people who didn't make it to class, okay? So deliberately, every time I'm like, post your notes from class, I also include, and if you did not make it to class, here's what you should do instead, so that you don't have to miss those points, okay? This kind of leads into my next point that I wanted to make, which is, if you aren't reading the instructions, then you don't notice that, you should definitely read the instructions. And I say that sort of laughingly. Most people are reading the instructions, and I can tell because you're following them, right? Like, in most cases, it's obvious you did indeed read the instructions, because otherwise you would not be doing the stuff. But it's come up in a couple of small ways over the last week or two, and I wanted to emphasize, because I mentioned this in the announcement post that I made earlier, I wanted to emphasize that truly, reading and following instructions is an underrated skill that has, by the hour, it makes me a lot more money than teaching does, right? It's not nearly as much fun as teaching college, but it does pay better by the hour. If you become somebody who will sit down with the instructions and read them and follow them in order to fix the thing that somebody messed up when they did not read the instructions the first time, you will always be able to earn a living. It is valuable, truly. So that's just kind of a word to the wise. It's good for you in English class, but also of all the things that you could learn, like all of the skills that you could learn in college, I have 3 graduate degrees, and really no thing that I've learned, like everything that I've learned in those degrees has been useful. I use my Spanish degree most days. I use my anthropology background quite a bit. I'm still using the copywriting degree that I got as an undergraduate. It's all cool, but nothing has actually paid the bills any better than my ability to sit down, read the instructions, and then follow them. Truly. So I am passing on to you advice that has been useful to me. And not just for college, right? Like, it's like how to use a new software program or XYZ thing. So anyway, that's all I have for today. If you got questions, I do welcome them. Send me a message, let me know. I'll talk to you soon.